next topic we've got, we're going to have Mildred Chihak, volunteer coordinator at HERDA, Jen Cross Hodge from Volunteer Transportation Center, and Deanna Hageman, who is the director at Northeast Iowa RSVP. If you guys want to come on, and we will go ahead and begin our panel discussion. And then Brooke Ramsey will be the moderator for the session. Don't see Jen on currently, unless she's named something different.
I'm here.
All righty, there she is. All right, I will turn it over to you guys.
Okay, Jen, did you want to go ahead and get us started with a quick overview of your program?
Sure, absolutely. So thank you for having me. As they said, my name is Jen Cross Hodge. I am the development director and corporate compliance officer for an organization called Volunteer Transportation Center. And we are located in upstate New York, not Rockland County, but further up north, just 20 miles south of the Canadian border in the Jefferson County area. We've been around for over 30 years and we provide non-emergent transportation. And we focus on things like critical services, cancer treatment, access to food sources, and dialysis, things like that. But we do it in a unique way. We're not a taxi service. We provide our services through a network of volunteers, and those volunteers drive their own vehicle and then are reimbursed for mileage. So a little bit different than what is found in some other areas. Very effective program for a rural area, and effective for both the clients and for the communities in which we serve. We have recently developed a project called VTC in the Box, and it's not really a box, but rather a program format that we can help others around the country establish programs like ours. So we've been successful with a program in New Hampshire. We have a program that was a pilot through UC Davis in California. And our most recent success is with a program in Missouri. So we're really working hard to bring our success to those around the country to help people remain healthy and independently in their own homes.
That sounds like a lot of moving parts.
It is a lot.
Deanna, do you want to give a brief overview of yours?
Sure, I'm Deanna Hageman. I'm the director with the Northeast Iowa RSVP. And so we have Howard, Winneshiek, and Elmeke counties, very rural counties. We have a fairly large program. We have right now about 612 volunteers. Not all of them are active. About 480 of them or so are active. We have 77 stations that we connect volunteers with. If you're not familiar, RSVP technically stands for Retired Senior Volunteer Program, but I tell my folks you don't have to be retired, and I won't make you admit you're a senior. You just have to be 55 and better. So really connect people with what their interests are into organizations that are looking for volunteers. Last year, our volunteers logged about 33,781 hours, so pretty significant program. We've been RSVP with the Decorah Public Library for 22 years. And yeah, I don't know if you want to know anything else.
That's a lot of hours.
We're busy.
Quite impressive. Mildred, do you want to do a brief overview?
So we have HERDA Helps, which is a volunteer program for Boone, Dallas, Madison, Marion, and Warren counties. In Boone, Dallas, and Warren County, we have a volunteer driver program to help people get to medical appointments. And then in Madison and Marion County, we have the RSVP. So we also connect people with local opportunities for volunteering. And then we have in those counties our own opportunities as well. So medical, transportation, our friendly neighbor program, so people can provide social visits, and then our food support program.
So Mildred, why are the programs in Madison and Marion County different than the rest?
So Madison and Marion County, we have the RSVP grant for them. And in Boone, Dallas, Warren, they already have their own RSVP, so we don't want to duplicate the programs that are already there. And then Boone, Dallas, Warren didn't have medical transportation as part of their RSVPs. So we're partnered with the Boone RSVP to be a volunteer station for them. And then we just provide medical transportation in Dallas and Warren as well.
That's also a lot of moving parts, Mildred. So can we talk about maybe some advice that Dina and Jen that you have for people who are building a new volunteer program or are new to trying to recruit volunteers specifically? Our program's pretty new, so I don't know that Mildred's going to have a ton of feedback for this one, but you two have been doing this for quite a while and your programs are pretty large.
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing for us is that you have to become engaged in the county in which you're going to provide the service. So whereas Dina talks about stations, we are in towns. So we seek the support of the folks in the towns, not just the townspeople, but the council, county representation. If there's an agency there, an office for the aging, a Department of Social Services, you know, something along those lines that has connections already. We partner with those folks. Actually, in 2 of our counties, we partner with RSVP to help recruit volunteers in our particular program. It's those connections that help you become successful, especially if they already have maybe a small program, maybe it's a church or another small community organization. If they already have volunteers, we just help them put some structure to it so that then we can increase the number of folks that we're serving. So I think partnerships really is the biggest success and the best way to develop these programs.
I would agree with that as well. Our stations are the organizations we refer to. So we also have connections with the cities and the towns in our counties. Really, I think our growth has been because of a couple of programs. One is Pen Pals. And so we have, I think we're right around 260 third graders that we have volunteers writing to. And so we have a volunteer get involved and she brings 3 friends or she tells her husband or, and so we have a lot of growth because of volunteers telling volunteers, hey, you should do, they're telling their friends, hey, you should do this with me. Last year when we took on several new schools, I went to every county fair and I was there every opening hour. And I think the people around me were like, oh no, I have to be by her at this fair too, because if you looked 55, I stopped you. And I just said, hey, I don't know if you're 55 or not yet. And some people will go, oh, bless you, I'm 70. Well, perfect. So I've complimented them. Hey, would you be interested in writing to Pen Pals from your school? And so I think helping them have some ownership in some of the programs helps as well. I seen there was a question in the chat about riders. We don't do any transportation. So a lot of some examples of some of the programs we have is we have 5 food pantries. We have a tax program through the VITA. This year, I think we had about 24 volunteers that did over 600 tax returns. We do meal delivery. We had some volunteers. We have a new veterans park going up. And so we had volunteers researching the veterans that belonged on those walls. We have mentoring. The Decorah Library, which is my sponsor, has like 8,000 large print books. And so every month we send a selection of large print books out to smaller libraries. So every month they get a new collection of large print for their patrons so that they don't have to buy those. So we have a lot of different opportunities so that, you know, a volunteer can come to us and say, well, I'm not much into food pantries. And I can say, okay, well, how about the Chamber of Commerce, or how about, and so really, I think the fact that when they come to us and we look at what do they want to do and what connections can we make based on what they want to do, that makes them really excited to be a volunteer with us, and they share with other people. So really our best recruitment is our volunteers.
And that works for us as well. And we always say, well, not we, Sam, our executive director, says it's like Burger King. You can have it your way. And because they are volunteers, you know, they don't have to punch a clock and be here from, you know, 8 to 5 every day. So if they only want to work every Tuesday, or they want to only work, you know, our folks who live on the lake, they want to drive during the winter. And those of our folks who want to go to Florida in the winter drive only in the summer. So really you can, the more flexible we can be with them, I think makes it easier for them to want to volunteer with us. So I think retention is very important. It's not just recruiting, but it's making sure you keep them and you're staying engaged with them. It's like this week is Volunteer Appreciation Week. So, you know, you can stop into the office, you can always get coffee, but today you can get a little extra pastry, or, you know, we'll do some raffles or whatever we have to do just to recognize the good work that these volunteers do for our communities.
So Mildred mentioned earlier, we have a few of the RSVP directors on the meeting today. And so ladies, if you want to give a shout out on any of these questions, feel free to, you know, turn your mic on and jump in. We love to hear from you. But so that sparks a great question back to volunteer recognition. So Mildred, our volunteer recognition is later this week, right? Do you want to talk about what we're doing?
It's next week.
Hey, Brooke, before I forget, do you want to answer that question that was in the chat about volunteer driver, or about the riders on the volunteer driver program?
Oh, yeah, I guess I thought Dina answered that, but Mildred, I'll let you do both of those.
So with our volunteer program for RSVP, all of our volunteers have to be 55 or older. In Boone, Dallas, and Warren, they do not have to be 55 or older.
We can have volunteers.
What about the riders?
The riders, sorry. I read that wrong. So the riders for our program can be older adults, veterans, people with disabilities, or people with lower income. Those are our focus populations. However, if someone needed a ride and they didn't have any other option, I would help them if I could.
And we have volunteers that are under 55, but we can't report them on our grant activities if they're not 55. So, you know, if you're interested, or you have a preteen that wants to help out in some way, you know, especially over the summer, keep them busy, but they're not old enough to work. So volunteerism would be great just for a short period of time. You know, you can still spread the word. You can still have them reach out to Mildred. There's lots of things we can have them do. I know in the session that Michelle had, she talked about filing paperwork, and I mentioned, you know, making phone calls to some of our writers for a variety of different reasons. They could be helping with a mailer. I know just in trying to recruit people. Mildred, how many mailers have we done now? 3? Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so there's different things that we can do. If you have someone who's interested in volunteering and they're not 55, we can probably still find something. But as far as who we serve, like Mildred said, we just want to help everybody. Okay, so Mildred, sorry, talk about recognition.
So our recognition that we're doing this year, we actually just had our Driver Appreciation Day last month, I believe it was. So all of our volunteer drivers got an appreciation gift for that. And then next week, we're doing our volunteer recognition luncheon where we're all going to go to the zoo and have lunch there. And they're going to be able to experience an animal. We're not sure what animal will be brought to the lunch, but we'll find out on Friday next week. And then our volunteers also will have time that they can walk through the zoo if they'd like as well.
So it'll be fun to hear how that went later. So Dina, Jen, can you maybe throw some ideas of recognition that you guys have done before that you thought went over really well?
This week, well, actually last week, I sent out postcards to every one of my active volunteers, anybody who had served hours in the past year. And the postcard is good for up to $5 credit at one of 6 businesses that I reached out to. We in the past had given away what, I don't know if everybody's familiar with chamber bucks. They're dollars that are good at many locations in a community. We, in an audit, were dinged on that because how did we know that those chamber bucks were not used to buy alcohol, which we had no way of knowing. And so our auditor said, no more chamber bucks, which our volunteers loved. And so we had to get a little bit more creative. And so these businesses that I reached out to do not serve alcohol. Most of them are a coffee and bakery or lunch kind of place. And so the volunteers can take their postcard into that location, sign it because we have to have signatures per our grant. And then they will leave the postcard at the business. And next week, I'll pick up all the postcards and reimburse the businesses for the volunteers who came in during this week. And so this was something really new that we tried. Volunteers are loving it. I'm having them stop by and say, oh my gosh, I got my postcard. This is so excited. I've never been to this place and now I get to go. So that's this week. That's what we're doing. We typically have a volunteer appreciation event in the fall.
We do events as well. We try to do one in the spring and one around Christmas time, a holiday party, and we invite them in and we have a luncheon and that kind of thing. They always like to eat, and it's a good time to get everybody in one place. And we found that they as volunteers like to mix amongst each other. I think they hear a lot about each other from the clients that they transport. And so it's nice to put names to faces. We have a quarterly volunteer of the quarter program. And so we've just rebooted that since COVID. And we as staff vote for the folks that we believe are the best volunteers that particular quarter. They then can pick a piece of swag from the Land's End catalog with our logo on it. They can have their vehicle detailed. And then we have a luncheon for them. So this Friday, we have our luncheon coming up for our Q1 volunteers of the quarter. Their name goes on a plaque and we do all sorts of promo with it. But we take any chance that we can to recognize them. We have a good Facebook following. So we tend to put notices up there, you know, so-and-so did great. A couple of years ago, before we moved to our new building, I did a high five program. And back then, volunteers were in our office all of the time. So it was actually a high five, but it had on it what that person did well. And we, throughout the year, covered the entire wall with those high fives. And people would come in and look to see who was up on that board. And they really appreciated, you know, the recognition for the good work that they're doing. You know, you mentioned your hours. We measure things by miles, and we do 6 million miles a year, which is a huge number of miles. And that's something for them to be proud of. They're very proud of the fact that they're helping people in the community. So it could be anything small, recognition in a newsletter, or it can be, you know, a luncheon in their favor. It doesn't matter as long as they feel like they're getting the recognition for what they're doing.
Yeah, that's great ideas. So Julia's just curious, why do you track miles and not hours, or why don't you track both?
We do track both. And for my RSVP programs, I do hours and miles. But as a general rule, we look at the number of miles. When our program started in the early 90s, our founders, I can remember Peggy saying to me once, man, we thought we were doing a stroke of business. We had 65 miles that year. I'm thinking, our average, round trip now is almost 50, because we're in the more rural parts of the area. So miles are important, they're impactful. And we use the miles because we reimburse our drivers for the miles that they travel. So then we can equate that to, a cost. What is it costing a community to provide this type of service? And we can show the savings. Typically, it's about 75 cents per 25-mile trip that it costs us to provide. And we know that if we put that with a taxi in their reimbursement rate, it's going to be about $30 or $40 to provide that same service. So for our purposes, miles show the best story. But yes, we do track the hours as well.
Yeah, I was shocked when you said 6 million, I gotta be honest. That's a lot. You're doing a lot. So do you maybe want to share some challenges that you've encountered in managing volunteers and how you overcame those? Just to give, people might be thinking, hey, volunteers sound great. We've talked a lot about them here today, and, but it might be difficult to manage them, or that might be hard for me to implement. So just some thoughts on how you kind of overcame some of those.
We recently started a buddy program with some of our volunteers. So for us, Medicaid has changed how transportation has to be tracked. Everything has to be GPS tracked. So we've given them all tablets. We know that our volunteers are retirees for the most part. So average age is between 65 and 85. And so using technology can be a challenge for some of them. Though I'll tell you that I have a couple of 90-year-olds who use it and they use it just fine. But we need to make sure that we're capturing that data, because without that, we can't bill some of the insurances that we partner with. So we, when we bring a new driver on, we find them a buddy, someone here on our staff, and they just touch base with them a little bit more often than we would somebody who's a little more seasoned. So we check in with them, after 5 days, after 10 days, and they often will stop back in the office and have questions and things as well. But we just try to provide a more personal touch. And I think, again, it goes back to those relationships. It's not just those in the community, but it's the relationship that you have with the volunteer as well. You can't just take it for granted that, these folks are going to stick around. You have to remind them why they're sticking around, because you value what they're doing. So I think the buddy program, from what I can see for the last, 6-8 weeks, it's really working well. They're getting the software help that they need, but they're also, I can see them showing up a little bit more in the office, which is nice too.
My perspective's a little bit different. We have experienced really unexpected growth, and we have one director and a 0.4 volunteer coordinator. And so a few years back, I went to my supervisor and I said, I'm going to have to start saying no to volunteers. I'm going to have to start saying no to stations. And that's not something I'm really good at. And so she suggested I reach out to my peers, which some of which are on this call, but one of them said, you need service enterprise. And so I don't know if anybody's familiar with service enterprise, but we went through service enterprise through the National Points of Light. And one of the things, it sounds really silly that I didn't figure this out without service enterprise, but one of the biggest things we realized is we have a ton of talent that comes into our program that I turn around and refer out to other organizations, when in reality, we could use them. We could partner with them and benefit from them. So some examples of how we maneuvered around some of the challenges is I used to enter in all the timesheets, and I used to enter them in by the day. So if somebody worked at the food pantry 6 times that month. That was 6 entries. And one of our food pantries at the time had about 100 volunteers. So as you can imagine, that was a lot of data entry. So we streamlined that to 1 entry per month per volunteer at each station. But I had figured out that I had done about 30 hours a month in data entry. And so I reached out to a gal who used to do data entry for a living and said, hey, do you want to still keep doing this? And she said, sure. So she comes in and enters in all of my timesheets. I don't touch timesheets. I feel like I'm an okay writer, but whenever I have something that's going into the newspaper, I kind of start to panic. And does that sound right? And so I did a little survey and found out that I now have like 8 retired journalists. They read all of my press releases. And so we just kind of took a look at what am I not good at, what takes a lot of time, what maybe don't I like doing, and reached out to volunteers who could fill those, who we could partner with that could fill those needs. We promoted volunteers to lead volunteers. So we used to do some scheduling, or we still do some scheduling for like blood drives and that kind of stuff. I have a lead volunteer who takes care of all of that. And so the joke is we also doubled their salary. And so whenever I promote somebody, I tell them, there's a lot more perks, we'll double your salary. And so totally changed the way we were able to respond to a lot of the needs that were going on unmet with just 1.4 staff prior to that. So service enterprise was kind of how we dealt with the challenges we were having.
Mildred, do you want to talk about any challenges that you've had?
I mean, my biggest challenge right now is recruiting volunteers since it's a new program. So we don't have anything for managing volunteers yet.
Did what Dina said about, the data entry and that kind of stuff, did that resonate with you from some changes you just made?
Not really, because we were always doing the volunteers enter their hours. So we have a couple volunteers that aren't able to use the technology that we have. So they send in their hour sheets, but it takes like 2 seconds to enter those right now. So eventually it'll be a problem, but right now it's not.
We also, Mildred's program also just changed software companies from the one that we started with over to a different technology. Do you want to talk about that, Mildred?
Yeah, so we used to use Volunteer Reporter for our database, and it just wasn't serving the need that we had for it. So we switched over to Galaxy Digital or Get Connected. So it's the same software that Michelle went over a little bit earlier today. So now we have the database that the volunteers can go in and sign up for their own opportunities on that website. And it's a web-based program, so I can go in anywhere in the community and look at it instead of having to be in the office to see it. All of our volunteers can report their hours on it really easily. There's an app that they can report their hours through. So we have some volunteers that check in at the start of their shift on the app, and then they check out at the end of it. So they don't have to worry about calculating their hours. And then we have the capability of doing blog posts through there too. So we're going to do that eventually.
I just love that the volunteer stations, for example, emergency management, they can go in and put their opportunities in and people can match themselves. So it gives that freedom and independence, and also timeliness, because there's, a factor when people want something to do and they see an opportunity. If, you're on vacation and you don't get back to them right away, they might have found something else. I think, Dina, you might have talked about that earlier too. That's a big part of keeping people is, keeping them busy. That's what they're looking for. Let's see. What are ways that you connect with community members?
For us.
Well, go ahead.
No, go.
So because we're pretty rural, there are a lot of our organizations cover all 3 counties. One of the things that we do that our counties have is called an interagency meeting. And so those are they're each county has an interagency and they're quarterly, so they're kind of scattered at different times, but it's typically the same people that we meet there. So a lot of them are pretty connected or pretty aware of RSVP. We've partnered with the Iowa Insurance Division and we're taking fraud fighters out. And so a lot of people were like, you know, they attend a fraud fighter meeting, they find out that RSVP has hosted it. Now they've been made aware of our organization. We're a United Way organization. And so they do a lot of promoting of the organizations that they help fund. So we have awareness raised through that. We are the chambers is one of our stations that we have volunteers at. So a lot of people will move into the community and go into the chamber and say, hey, I'm new here, what can I do? And they'll send us up. So chambers are good connections. The interagency meetings, United Ways, we do newspaper articles. So like I said, one of my volunteers will write an article when we've had something go on. And that always includes, if you want to get involved, here's how to get involved. The fairs, like I said, I was at all 3 county fairs last year. If there's health fairs, we try and go to those. If there's any kind of senior, area agency on aging events, we try and go to those. That's just the few I can think of right offhand.
Those are great. And we do all of that and above. We spend a lot of time doing outreach, both myself, our program directors, and we have a great foundation director here who was a former journalist. So he already knows a ton of people. He gets invited out very often. So, we try to be out there. We encourage our staff to become members of boards of directors of other nonprofits in the area so that we can work kind of from the inside out. We're always looking for new and great ways to be able to do things like that. OFA has been a great partner for us. Their newsletters. One of our favorite pieces that we used during COVID is everybody had to get creative about maintaining their business. And certainly we did as well. There were a number of volunteers who didn't feel comfortable transporting during that time, but we did gain, believe it or not, some volunteers over those months and years. So we use stickers to put on to-go containers because everybody was getting takeout. Nobody sat at a restaurant for quite a while. So just trying to be in front of the public as often as possible. I think that's a great way for us to partner in the community. We present at town meetings. You get a good crowd, especially if it's a community that has a little fun going on. Our city right now is in the midst of getting ready for an election and it's pretty heated. So you get a good audience there. And it's generally covered by local media. So if you're lucky, they'll pick that up. And then we're strategic about who we bring on to our board of directors as well. Much like us going out and joining other boards of directors, we too invite folks from all different walks of life to be on our board of directors so that, we do have somebody in the media, we do have a lawyer, we have, a funeral director, believe it or not, which it works because we're looking for that, retired population. So what are they doing? They're thinking about, what's next. And I'm not saying death is next, but I'm saying they're going to plan for the future. And so, they have that lead on that sweet spot that we want. So those are just a few ways that we partner. We also have a rural health council of sorts here in our area, and we do a lot of work with them as well. They have the meetings that Dina was talking about where everyone gets together and talks about their services. But they have also initiatives where, when you go to the doctor now, there's a thing called Z codes. And so you can code for transportation as a barrier to care. So we take that opportunity to talk to all the medical professionals and say, hey, everyone says it's an issue to get to the doctor, but this is your way to help us quantify that. So, we do small pilot projects with folks like that as well to make sure that, we're hitting another demographic.
Yeah, we have some of our stakeholders are actually on right now, a few of them I saw. So just curious a little bit about, when you talk about the community and especially people who, what we've struggled with a lot is awareness of what RSVP even means. So Mildred and I have been talking with AmeriCorps about, is there a way that they could do more education from their end to kind of help that problem? That would help tremendously with us in the recruitment process. But just, for communities that maybe weren't familiar with what RSVP does or, the benefits of volunteerism, is there something you can think of or suggest to get buy-in from the stakeholders to understand, the benefits of what you're really doing?
I think for us, anytime we go out and we do any kind of advertising, we're looking for drivers, but we're getting more clients every single time we're going out there. So for us, it's not getting that group of stakeholders, it's getting the folks that are gonna help us serve those stakeholders. So it's really just finding the right place to find those folks. I've done a couple of drop mails, I've done a couple of targeted mail campaigns just to see if I can get to the right household. But I think it's repetition. It 7 times someone has to hear a message before they actually understand or, finally go, oh, I should really look that up. I should check out their website. So it's coming up with a plan and then just hitting it hard, whether it be, first quarter of the year, you're talking about mail campaigns, and then weather gets nicer. So now you're going to hit all the farmers markets, always sporting some kind of logoed gear or whatever, or making sure your display is good so that as they continue to see that, they eventually will go, huh, what's that all about? And it works. People will say, oh, hey, I saw you on TV, or, I saw you at the farmer's market or whatever. It's just getting out there. I think community education is a little different than marketing. It's spending time talking to people and developing relationships where you're explaining what your service is. And just like we talked about with volunteer recruitment, it's that person to person type of thing where you explain it. Maybe it's not right for Ethel, but she goes home and she talks to Janie, and Janie goes, you know what, I can do that. So it's just, sometimes we feel like a broken record because it's, we're on autoplay. But I think that the more that you can talk about it, the more recognition you'll have in the community and the easier your recruitment will be.
I would agree. And I think it's the stories that sell a lot of the programs. I started really sharing with some of our stakeholders some of the stories that I hear from volunteers. Whenever a volunteer has a really neat story, I say, will you write that down? Is it okay if I share it? Because I think humanizing what we do and why we do it. I had a volunteer come in tears the other day, and I thought, oh no, what's happened? And she said, Dina, I just want you to know that I moved to this community 2 years ago and I didn't know a soul. It was in the middle of COVID. I didn't know what to do. She's one of the ones that the chamber said, go up to the library and talk to RSVP. She said, I want you to know that I have found some of the best friends. I am doing something I love, and I feel like I'm making a difference. She had been to a childcare center working, and every child had to hug her before she left. And she said, I can't thank you enough for what we do. Those are the stories that sell RSVP, because it's not just organizations we're helping, it's the volunteers that walk through. I don't have a door, but walk into my office. The other thing that I do is I give everybody a t-shirt at orientation. So it's kind of the strike while the iron's hot kind of thing. We get them through orientation. We talk about the connections that we can make for them at the different opportunities. And then I give them a t-shirt and I say, it's not really a uniform. You don't have to wear it when you volunteer. We would love it if you wore it when you volunteered. Wear it when you're having coffee with friends. Wear it when you're on the trail walking your dog. Wear it, when people say, what is that? Please explain to them what it is and what you do and why you love it. So I really make them kind of my ambassadors of the program as well. And they're much better at it than I am.
Mildred, do you want to share some of the things that you've been doing?
So we go to farmers markets, we do mailers like everyone's been saying as well. One of our ways that we've reached out to the community has also been through the providers meetings. And then the Knoxville Hospital has a community health navigator there that we met through the providers meetings. And she does an assessment with every patient that she ends up talking to. And we've actually gotten a few volunteers that she's thought could use social visits. So they actually have ended up becoming volunteers providing social visits instead of receiving social visits, which has been great. And then she also refers people for our volunteer driver program who need transportation to the hospital as well.
So we do have some transit systems on the call. We also have a couple of people from the DOT, but just, you know, for them to understand why, you know, I know volunteer drivers may not sound like, oh, that makes total sense for transit to have volunteer drivers, but can you guys maybe talk about why they might want to reconsider that, or, you know, just think outside of the box in the way that they're providing the service to the community by using volunteers?
So we work really closely with the communications center here at HRDA. So if they have a trip that they're going to have to refuse, they'll send them over to me and I'll see if I can find a volunteer that can provide the trip. And same way, if I had a trip that our volunteers couldn't provide, I'd see if HRDA can provide the trip. For example, right now we have a community member going, having daily trips to Pella from Indianola. And that's not a service that HRDA can normally provide, since we don't normally cross county lines in that way. However, with our volunteer program, our volunteers can provide the majority of those daily trips. And then since it's through our volunteer program, HRDA has been able to cover a few of the trips as well.
We have two programs that we have developed over the last few years. The first was Access to Care, and that was a really interesting program because it was funding that came through the accountable care organizations to help us get folks who needed to get to non-medical services. So it might be somebody who had Medicaid as their payer source, but really could benefit from getting to the library or going to church every Sunday or some other social event, getting to an event at the park or the zoo, as you guys were talking about. So, you know, thinking outside the box in terms of how do we find funding to address the clients in the community as a whole, and not just making sure that their medical services are met. And that's worked out really well. And it's actually transformed into a project picked up by some of the recovery agencies in a couple of our counties. And we have now transformed that into Rides to Recovery. So now we're able to get people to AA or NA or, you know, those types of services, along with some of the other services that would address the social determinants of health. The other program we have is one that works in conjunction with our bus system. And public transit is great, but as you just said, it doesn't cross county lines, it doesn't go here, it doesn't go there. And especially if you're in a rural area, that can be difficult. So we ran a pilot project with the state of New York to establish a first mile, last mile program. So we essentially use our volunteer drivers to pick that person up at their home, get them to the closest municipal bus stop, and then they can take public transit from there. Sometimes they come back to that same bus stop, sometimes they don't, depending on what the routes are that day. They might go to a different bus stop that's closest to their home, and then our volunteer picks them up and takes them the remainder of the way. So I think you're right. You have to get creative about how you address these issues and concerns with the folks, and especially being in a rural area, it can be a little bit more challenging than when you're in an urban area that has, you know, multimodal systems.
Yeah, that's a great point. So Dina, Denise threw a question out here. She wants to know, How did you find out the expertise of your volunteers? Was there a survey? Can you share? No one wants to create the wheel. We want to borrow yours.
I'm happy to share. So we have an application and then which is front and back, and then there's another page attached to it that does have kind of general opportunities. So there's opportunities within working with children. There's opportunities within food source or food insecurity kinds of things. And so they're kind of broken out. And then there's an open area on the bottom that says, what would you like to share with us? Where I think it's most crucial to get the information and to build the relationship with the volunteers during orientation. So we have orientations of no more than 5 volunteers that come in at a time when they're new. We provide them with their t-shirt, we give them a name tag, and then we give them a handbook. We go through kind of our policies, what we can and can't do. And then we go through each of the stations and we talk about, in 30 seconds or less, what you could do at each of our partner stations, or what volunteer opportunities they have. And at the end of that, I ask them, sometimes there's other things that we can make happen. So when you were in your work world and sitting there frustrated someday and you say, man, I can't wait till I can retire so I can, what is that? And so, for example, one couple who came in together to orientation, when I asked them that question, they said, my mom was in the nursing home and she loved when a dog would come and visit. So we actually have a dog that we're almost through being certified as a visiting animal or whatever, a pet. I don't think that she actually has a pet therapy certification, but she's approved to take into nursing homes. She said, could you help us with that? And so, no place on my survey does it say take an animal or take a dog to the nursing home, but I do have long-term care visitors. And so I said, oh, absolutely. And so Hazel is the dog. She's certified now and she loves her visits with long-term care. That's making, checking off their box of what they wanted to do in retirement and also meeting some of our needs. So I kind of use that example and I say, what is it that you wanted to do in retirement? And is it something that I can kind of mold into our program? So really, I think during orientation today, we had a couple of gals and one of them disclosed that she used to plan tours in her early in her career. And we have a veterans tour that leaves Iowa and they're out in DC on their way to and back from DC for 8 days. I said, oh my gosh, they would probably love your help. And so just by visiting with them, sometimes the small talk, we learn the most, but really it's orientation. I have them check anything that they would be interested in because we're still in Volunteer Reporter. I wrote down your Galaxy Digital just to check it out because I have a love-hate relationship with Volunteer Reporter. But one of the things when we have gardening, for example, is coming up now, anybody who's expressed interest in gardening, we send them information. They may say, no, I don't want to help with that. They may say, oh, I've been waiting. So I tell them to check anything they'd like to hear about. And so Denise, I can share that. I can share that with the rest of the Iowa volunteers if they want, but I guess I didn't think we had anything unique here. But if we do, I'm happy to share.
I think there's probably more unique than you think of because you're doing some really great things. So Danny would love to hear ideas about promotional materials that you give away, and then Mildred, lucky you if he wants you to share what we're doing.
So we target our giveaways when we go to the fair or farmers markets or such. We have the traditional rack cards and that kind of thing, but it is my experience that folks like stuff. I am not a stuff collector, but people like stuff. So anything that would make it easier for a senior to do something. So jar openers, letter openers, that kind of thing. Magnets are great because you can throw them right up on the refrigerator. They're right there and people can go, oh yeah, I forgot I talked to those people, at the county fair the other day. So we do those kinds of things. I don't think we've not found anything terribly exciting yet. But just trying to match what we give away to the audience in which we're providing our presentations for that particular day.
We operate on a really, really, really limited budget. And so we don't have the ability to purchase a lot of giveaways. In the past, when I have had funds, pens, just because we can also use them, I will occasionally take a handful down to the bank or, plant them in different locations. We have them available at our events. So when you go home and you go, oh, this is where I got that pen. So pens have probably been our staple, just because I can get a lot for not a lot of money. We have done the clips, the clip magnets. And this year for appreciation, I have a few left over. We bought pizza cutters. That was apparently, my advisory council said you have to get pizza cutters. And so we got some nice pizza cutters. But they're really more for our volunteers. I don't have pizza cutters to give away at a fair.
So we also have pens. Since we're a volunteer driver program, we got ice scrapers for the volunteers. And then I also take them to events, and sometimes people take them. Sometimes people are really excited about the ice scrapers. And we have two different types of ice scrapers. So we have some that are like the credit card size that are exciting for some people. And then we have the regular hand ones as well. And then the giveaway that I like the most for recruitment is we have reusable insulated bags that we hand out. So I can put all of our promotional materials or brochures, my business card in the bag. And then a lot of people don't want to stop as they walk by, so I can just hand them a bag and they can look at it later. So that's one that I've enjoyed. We have the chip clips, and then we just got chapstick recently as well. So
She doesn't sound as aggressive about meeting people at the fair when she's tabling as Dina does. Dina's like out there. I can just.
I was just gonna say, Mildred, you got to say hi. Hey.
I say hi.
No, but you got to stop them. Because I can't tell you how many people were going to walk by, and when I stopped them and talked with them, they were like, oh, I had no idea. Yeah, I'll do that. So you just gotta be assertive. I had volunteers with me at the fair. And so it was really nice because I know a lot of people in Winneshiek. I know quite a few people in Howard County, but I don't know anybody. Well, that's not true. I know fewer people in Elm-McKee. And so I would say to the volunteer, hey, do you know these guys? They look old enough. And she'd say, oh yeah, that's Jim and Susie. And so she would stop them and say, hey, you should hear about this. This is really cool. So that's the other piece, is that I did partner with volunteers. I had volunteers with me at the fair sitting next to me. So lots of times if I would stop somebody, I'd say, well, why don't you tell them what you do? And then the volunteer could talk about their experience. But yeah, you got to stop them. You got to stop them in their tracks. Don't let them walk by. Don't hand them a bag and let them walk by. You want me to come down? I will.
Talking to me though.
Huh?
Sometimes if I hand them a bag, it guilts them into talking to me too, because they're like, oh, I guess I have to look at this stuff. I have gotten a few volunteers that way.
Yeah, stop them.
And you just have to be willing to talk to people. I mean, my kids tell me I'll talk to a stick, and we go anywhere. I talk to anybody about anything. You never know where it's gonna, lead you. I recently ran into someone at a local hospital in Syracuse, New York, and lo and behold, I walked into the local market in my little Dexter, New York, which is about, a little village of 150 people. And there was that same lady, and I was like, oh, hey. And my sister was with me. She goes, how do you remember these people? Like, you got to make the connections, because if you don't make the connection and you don't remember that connection the next time, you may miss the opportunity to recruit somebody. So you have to just put yourself there.
And just this morning, one of the ladies that was in the orientation, she said, I said, well, how did you find out about RSVP? And she goes, well, last year was the first year I ever went to the Wishoka County Fair. And I was going through the building and I was going to walk by, but this very nice lady stopped me and she told me about all the things that RSVP does. And she goes, "Was that you?" And I said, "Probably." And she said, I was going to keep walking, but she stopped me and here I am. So it took her a few months to get the application. She said, "I took the application and I just found it about a month ago." And I remembered about all the different things that I could do through RSVP. So it was cute. I said, "Well, I'm glad you said she was nice," because it probably was me.
Well, I think we've definitely shared some great ideas. Looks like we're getting close to the time. So any final thoughts or things you want to throw out to the rest of us?
I think just keep doing the good work that everyone's doing. I mean, volunteers are important. It's important to the people that they serve. It's important to their own personal mental health. And I think if we can continue to nurture all of those relationships on both sides of the coin, it just helps make our communities stronger. And that's really what we're looking for.
I would agree.
Me too.
Well said.
Well, you made it easy for us. Well, thank you for joining us, ladies, and thank you for your time. I think, as someone who volunteers myself, I think it's a great opportunity for all the reasons that we've talked about today. My only wish is that our volunteer program gets more people, and Mildred is so busy, we have to get her some coordinators. That would be my biggest wish on my wish list.
Well, Mildred's trying really, really hard. She really is. I don't think that she's jumping out and stopping people, but we're going to make sure she starts doing that. But I know it's got to take a few years to get things up and rolling. I mean, you can't just expect, like, going on the third year that you're going to have, 600 volunteers all standing in line waiting, right? I mean, I think she's twirling a sign. Mildred said we're sending Mildred out with a sign to twirl.
Like the guys trying to sell you the pizza or the Progressive commercials up Mildred out on the street doing a dance.
But I do think it's really, really helpful to hear how successful you guys are and what you've done to get there. And it gives Mildred a lot of aspiration of where I know she wants our program to go, and she'll make great strides in doing that. So I really appreciate you guys being here.
I grew up with a grandma who said, "You don't know unless you ask." And so I guess that's been my mantra all my life. I don't know if these people are interested unless I stop them and ask them. So like I said, I'm sure some of my peers around me were like, "Oh my gosh, she's at this fair too." But some of them were thankful because they would stop at me and then they would stop at the next place too. So they're, a couple of them said, "Man, I wish I could do what you do." So I love what I do, in case you can't tell. And so it's easy for me to just jump in, and there were some people who were very rude when I stopped them, and that's okay. But there were a lot of people.
But those aren't the people you want anyway.
Right.
So
there's a lot of people who probably would have walked by and I wouldn't have gotten to know had I not been really, you could call it maybe aggressive, highly assertive. But yeah, Mildred and I have talked, and I'm happy to help her do some recruitment. However, really, I think that you find some champion volunteers that you can elevate to be ambassadors and say, "You got to help me. You know these people. Who are your friends? Who do you go to church with? Who do you think could do what you do?"
yeah,
So it's
I think
really about
that's a
finding
great
those
idea. So
Nina, I prefer to call it a cheerleader for your program.
there you go. That sounds great. Hey, Danny, are you closing out or am I?
You can go ahead.
Okay, well, we're closing out then. I don't know. I'm sure he's going to say something like really great, but this was really great. It really was. You guys have been wonderful. I thank all the participants for being here. I hope you learned something today that you could take away that would be helpful to you. And I thank all of our speakers as well. So we will hope to see you all next year when we do our annual Beyond the Bus event like we do. So thank you very much, everyone.